Well, good day, Team Healthy. I'm so pleased to have you here once again today. And you know that one of the things I like to do is bring you some people who are on the front line talking about our topic with narcissism and the impact they can have on your life. And I have a special guest with me here today. And this is someone that I've become recently familiar with. Her name is Dr. Kerry McAvoy. Dr. McAvoy, first, thank you so much for being here with us here on our Surviving Narcissism podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. So much. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. I feel honored.
Okay, well, and it's mutual. Just please know that. Now, you have written on this topic of narcissism and specifically about toxic individuals. In fact, you have a new book called "Love You More," and is that a very new release? Am I correct on that?
It is. I published it about a year ago, last
Okay.
year, February. Yes.
Love You More. And then you're very active on various media sites, YouTube, Instagram. Tell us about what you have going on there.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I was widowed in 2015 and ended up getting in a second marriage that was really toxic and was shocking to me. What happened here? I thought, as a psychologist, I knew a lot about illness and dysfunction and relationships, and then to find myself a victim of abuse. So when I got out of it, to make sense of it, I wrote the story Love You More, trying to partly just to put it into a perspective and understand what happened and why it happened. But as I was doing that, then I began to connect with people on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube around their stories, and discovered that there's a lot of us who experience this type of dysfunctional, harmful relationship. So it's just been an incredible journey of my own, of discovery and making sense, but also really finding out that I'm part of a community that's experiencing this as well.
You know, so many people that are in our profession, you'd like to think, well, the reason I'm in the profession is because I perfected this whole thing and I've got it all figured out. Well, sure enough, we are trying to figure it out, but I know I consider myself to be a fellow sojourner, and clearly you consider yourself to be that. And if you can put an arm of encouragement around other individuals as you talk about what you've learned, then all the better. And so
Mhm.
that's what I'm hearing you say. Been there, done that. Now let's talk about how we can learn from this.
Yeah, exactly. I think that what is not understood about narcissistic abuse, which makes it different from other forms of abuse, is that there is a deception, and that we think we've met a real person and we haven't. We've met a facade or a persona. And so we begin to build a relationship on that foundation, thinking this is something authentic, not realizing that we're being manipulated and exploited. And you're right, there is a lot of us that this is happening to, and it's very harmful. And it's helpful to, one, to be able to share our stories so that we know we're not alone, but it also helps to validate our experience, to know that we're not crazy or something's wrong with us for that happening. And you're right, as a psychologist, it was very humbling for me to have that happen, and very embarrassing. But if I'm feeling that way, then I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. So for me to share my story took a lot of courage for me. It was very, very difficult, but I kept thinking, this is going to help others, because if they can see themselves, is that even a psychologist can't prevent this from happening, maybe they can help find more grace and forgiveness for themselves for it happening to them.
Oh, and your words resonate so strongly. And again, I just appreciate where you're coming from. Now, okay, we're using this word toxicity, a toxic person. And actually, I went onto your website and I picked up a checklist that you came up with so that you could identify a toxic person. I want to go through some of those with you here in just a moment. But when you use that word toxic, as it relates to a person engaging in relational issues, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, clinically, if someone came into the office, I wouldn't diagnose them as toxic. I would say that they had some form of a personality disorder, probably. Like maybe they are higher on the narcissism scale, or maybe they're showing a lot of antisocial personality disorder problems. Maybe they might even have some borderline personality features, but there's not really a good general word to capture the difficulties some people have with managing normal ego functions, normal things like showing good judgment or having restraint or knowing how to deal with emotions. So toxic to me is just a nice way of capturing a group of people that may not have had their egos matured quite to the point that would make them easygoing or cooperative or a good team player.
You know, I I use the term the false self, and that's a very common term we use as we discuss the narcissist. And just listening to you, would it be fair to say, and I'd like to hear your comments on this, that that this toxicity begins very early on, in that individual's life? They've learned that they can't afford to be real or authentic or seek out help, and so they have to compensate for all of that. I mean, where do you see as some of the origins of this as being?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we have the final answers on this. I was able to hear Dr. Gregory Lester this last year in a continuing education course, and he was one of the DSM-5 committee members analyzing the traits of a personality disorder and what should belong in the DSM-5 and what doesn't. And he says that it's a biosocial problem, that there's a high rate of concordance among twins of narcissism. I think it's upwards to close to 70% of twins will both have narcissistic traits. But yet there's also a social component, sort of a nurturing component, not just a nature component. So I'm not for sure exactly what the combination is or what triggers it in some people, but I was trained in more of a developmental model, meaning that I see people on from infancy to adulthood, and that for some of us, things that should have occurred, like learning how to manage anger, or learning how to deal with really being sad, or learning how to say no to something we really want to do or don't want to do. But for some of us, we don't fully mature in those areas, and we have areas of weakness. I almost see it like a continuum of weak to strong, and some of us are really strong, maybe with showing insight into ourselves, and others are super weak. Maybe we're very empathic. Some of us are very empathic. Others of us may be very weak. Some of it's, I think you can also refer to this emotional intelligence as an
Oh,
EQ
very much,
issue.
yeah.
Yeah, that some of us have really low EQs. The false persona, that the way what you were referring to, gets developed, I think, in some of us as a way to manage the shame. If we're weak and we know that maybe we can't show up quite in the way that seems to be quote unquote normal, we might then develop a self that we think others want to see, at least makes good first impressions, without realizing that you can't build a relationship on that's not going to last very long.
You used the word shame, which is a word that many of us in the profession will use. One of the presumptions that I make is that whether it's conscious, and usually it's more subconscious, deep down on the inside, narcissists carry what I refer to as their own self-loathing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the vast majority of them would just roll their eyes and say, Carter, I don't know what you've been smoking, but no, that's not the case at all. In fact, they come across as being very impressed with themselves, etc. But then when we think, well, wait a minute, if you're so impressed with who you are, why do you have to cover everything up?
Yeah.
And why are you so absurdly defensive? And why do you have to deflect when someone says, hey, let's talk about something? And it can be something so simple, and they're extremely thin-skinned, etc. And the answer, at least to me, and I suspect to you, is they don't want anybody to know who they really are. They
Yeah.
don't want anybody to know what their hurts and pains and difficulties are. That's what I refer to as the self-loathing. But they want to maintain this veneer that says, I've got it together. Of course, you don't, but I do. I mean, is that consistent with what you see as part of this toxicity?
I do. I think all of us have a core of shame. I think that's just sort of a developmental stage that we have to do something with. I mean, I was thinking of Erickson's second stage of autonomy versus shame, and
Yes.
an essential, and it's one of the emotions that we experience is the most difficult to process. It undoes us. We really dislike it. I think it's a challenge for all of us to manage. But I also think there's a second group, though, that gets mixed into the narcissistic group, and that's the antisocial personality disorder group. I don't think that they feel a lot of shame. That group, I think, is a little more callous, and I think at their core is it's been theorized they're more empty there, or I experience them as more bored, restless. They just feel flat. There's not a lot of joy, not a lot of pleasure in their life. And so they're more pleasure seeking, and they'll do hurtful things to sort of get a rush. But yeah, the narcissist to me is trying to hide, and then the antisocial personality disorder is trying to get a thrill. And then you got the group who sort of sits in between both of those and is managing both issues.
Okay, some are trying to hide, some are trying to get a thrill.
Hmm.
I love the way you put that. And bottom line is they're constantly in compensation mode.
Yes.
When you say empty on the inside, there's just something that's missing there.
Hmm.
And then they're seeking that narcissistic supply. You exist to make me feel better right now.
Yes, exactly, exactly. They're both of them don't have their scaffolding inside to cope with these uncomfortable feelings. So the way that they cope with them is they address it externally with us, in relationship with us, which
Okay.
then becomes a problem for all of them, of us who's around them.
Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to make sure that we're educating our public well, as far as what to look for. And so you actually, in fact, on your website, and your website is what now?
It's Kerry McAvoy PhD.com.
Yeah, okay, because I knew it had your name, but I couldn't remember. It's like, okay, Kerry McAvoy, and it's McAvoy,
Hmm.
PhD.com. You actually have a checklist of things that that would indicate that a person might be toxic, and I want to run through some of these with you. And what I did is I went through some of these things that you wrote down there, and then there's kind of a category if we want to put these into. For example, you mentioned on the one of the first ones you mentioned that toxic people. Has your partner ever confided that as a kid they used to set fires or harm animals? And I wrote a note to myself: gross insensitivity towards the vulnerable.
Hmm.
What's that all about?
Yeah, well, and I don't know if it's still used as a diagnostic criteria or not, but it used to be that there was a triad of behavior that you would see in individuals who had antisocial personality disorders. Now, as a child, you wouldn't diagnose them with that. They would be diagnosed with conduct disorder.
Right.
But somebody who is showing sort of this, I agree with you, it is sort of this massive struggle with empathy, massive ability to recognize other things, especially weaker people, weaker things in their life as vulnerable. They struggle with that. And so you would see them they would have be setting fires, wetting the bed, and then they would be, what was the second fires? I
Harming
said, what was the other
animals.
one? Yeah,
Uh,
harming animals, exactly,
yeah.
harming others. Yeah. So there would be this triad of behaviors that you would see that would be alarming and concerning if you were seeing that.
Yeah, and it's just kind of the implication is they just don't think or feel beyond themselves,
Right,
and there's a real strong I use the word insensitivity, but there's a real strong undertow of anger, and
right.
I hate the world in front of me. I got to take it out on someone.
Or it could just be getting back to that thrill seeking, that they just enjoy watching things get hurt. You'll see that sort of sadistic side of them, and how it
Yeah,
shows up in adulthood is you'll see them do cruel or mean things. They may make jokes at other people's expense and not understand why that would be hurtful or inconsiderate or inappropriate. But you'll just see this kind of this ruthlessness about them.
by the way, another thing that just it's to me it's a huge red flag, but it kind of trails off of what you're saying is some of the entertainment themes that people can get caught up in. From time to time, I'll see a commercial on these cage fighting kind of things,
Hmm.
or I just cringe when I see things about the video games, and it's just about who am I going to kill. And and some people are just drawn towards that, like, oh man, that's cool. It's
Oh,
like,
I
no,
know, I
not at
know.
all.
Yeah, there's those that they're sort of the like got yous that people have on YouTube where they'll set somebody up and it's not very funny, very funny. There was one that was going around Halloween where parents were telling the kids that all the candy was gone, that it gotten stolen, and then taping their children's reaction to this, and then it was wildly popular. And to me, I don't know how much
Yeah,
more cruel you could be to do something like that.
yeah.
It's just very, yeah,
Teasing
concerning.
kids and just making them feel badly, and then laughing that you
Right,
got them.
right.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
okay. Now, another thing that you mentioned is these toxic individuals might dominate a conversation, making it difficult for you to get a word in edgewise. And you just mentioned a moment ago, lack of empathy. Tell us a little bit about why you put that on the list.
Yeah, well, it has to do with their difficulty with seeing other people as people. They don't tend to recognize your humanity or my humanity. And the only person, if you imagine the world's a stage, they see themselves as the only actor on the stage and the spotlight's on them. So they then tend to hog the stage.
Yeah.
And they don't even have a good sense of themselves doing that. They would say, if you ask them, what percentage of time do you think you talked to I talked? They would say, oh, I think it was fair. That's to the degree that they're blind, that they really don't recognize other people around them. So you sort of see this lack of just observation and reflection in the way that they handle relationships.
Yeah, and that's pretty pervasive too, isn't it? I
Hmm.
mean, and to the point of being astonishing that they have such low self-awareness like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Now,
And it is it is fun to ask them. I mean, to really literally ask them. So, how much of the percentage time do you think you've talked to I talked? And you're going to hear a percentage that you'll think, "Oh my goodness, you have no insight into this."
yeah, and I'll get people that'll. In fact, I've been on record as saying that a very high percentage of narcissistic individuals, particularly the further down the spectrum they go, just you can't really expect that there's going to be much change because they have such low insight. And I don't get a lot, but from time to time, somebody will give me some pushback on that. It's like, no, everybody can change. They just need to try hard enough. And with some people, it's like, nope, not going to happen. Not interested. Couldn't care less. I don't even know what you're talking about. You're the one that needs to change.
Yeah, here's the other thing that I just learned recently. And again, it came out of Dr. Lester's work. He said that, and I always knew that we had categories in the DSM. I'm sorry, we had conditions in the DSM-5 and we had disorders in the DSM-5. And I knew that the DSM-5, I'm sorry, the DSM-4 had the disorders were the disorders were under the developmental category, like along with IQ problems, with autism, other types of inherently neurological conditions. But the reason is because disorders are part of neurological hardwiring. They don't see themselves as having a problem.
Right.
Conditions are things that we suffer with. I mean, when you're depressed, you feel something's wrong. When you have anxiety, you know you're anxious or worried or something's wrong. But when you have a personality disorder, you don't recognize something is wrong. And what's wrong is everybody around you has the problem because they have a problem with you. But that's why they say, you have a problem. I don't have the problem. I'm fine. I like myself. So no, they don't tend to have a lot of self-awareness, which you're right. How do you change something if you can't see that it's problematic? We tend to only change things that cause us pain. And if it's not causing them pain, then they have no motivation to do anything about it.
I don't know if I've heard anybody put it quite that succinctly. I mean, that's a great way to look at it. Well, and then another thing too that you mentioned that people who are considered toxic often display rapid mood shifts and appear childish or immature. Uh, how does that play out?
Yeah, yeah, that has to do with emotional regulation. So, one of the things we need to learn as a child, if you go back to see a toddler, they don't get their way. What do? They melt down. You may be in the grocery store trying to check out. You've got the screaming kid who wants candy. But as we mature, we should learn to know how to cope with the things not going our way or not getting our way. And what happens for some of these individuals is they don't learn these skills. They still have this inability to sort of regulate intense emotions. And so we'll see this rapid shift. So adults tend to, we may feel the shift inside, may something happens that's shocking. You may feel a sudden feeling of rage, but no, this is inappropriate. I'm not going to express this. I'm going to process it. Maybe I'm going to go take a walk. But when you don't have that internal scaffolding again, then you react. You'll be very moody. You'll shift fast and you'll display it because you don't have the wherewithal inside of you to do something different with it.
I'm just personalizing this. Let's suppose I'm around a family member and they say something that is pretty insensitive, or it's like, where did you come up with that? And one of the options that I have at a moment like that is just pop right on out and say, well, you're stupid, or where'd you come up with that? Or no, that's not the way it happened. Or wait a minute. Well, calling someone stupid or being accusing, that doesn't work. And then I might also think, well, the bottom line is if you hang around me long enough, you're going to find out that I have my flaws too. And so you want to have that sense that says, yeah, we're all human, and your
Yeah.
humanity is showing up just like mine is in there too. And they don't think like that. Those kind of thoughts just do not run through their mind at all. It's just if they feel it, it comes right out, and it's
Yep.
your fault.
Yeah, you're making a very good point. There is an intersection with empathy. So not only do they have the ability to sort of hold themselves, contain themselves appropriately and not just react because something hurts, which so the more mature your ego is, the more you're able to do that. But you also then at the same time recognize that those around you may not have meant it. Maybe they didn't realize the way it came out or how it came across to you. Maybe they didn't even know that they touched something tender inside of you. So you have the ability to recognize this is a human being I need to treat with respect. But when you lack empathy and you don't see the other person as human, or instead they're more of an object, and on top of it, you don't have any ability to sort of restrain yourself, then you're going to be very moody, dangerously moody.
Well, this being an imperfect world, there are going to be all sorts of stimulations that'll throw you into that if you're so
Yeah.
inclined. Well, and another thing you mentioned on your website there, you mentioned that these toxic individuals are very prone toward retaliation, or they want to punish you. And again, we go back and say, well, even if you disappoint me, is it really my job to pound you into the ground? And some of these people think, yeah, it really is. That's what I'm going to do. Watch this.
Yeah, this is the one I think is probably the saddest one, and that is that their worldview is inherently different than ours. That it is not, they don't see the world as fair and equitable and that we all have our own path and that we'll get to where we're going. They view it like war, like a zero-sum
Yeah.
game. That so when you get ahead, your success then is a direct takeaway from mine. Or when you hurt me, that you somehow directly offended me and directly uh, 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 took something from me. So then they get revenge, they get even, they tend to hold grudges and really retaliate. And it's sad because the truth of the world is we don't live in a world like that. We live in a world where a lot of us can be successful and do well. Your success does not take away from mine, but they don't see it that way. It's
They
very
can't, yeah,
competitive, very competitive, and very jealous. That's in fact the DSM-5 lists jealousy as one of the core attributes of narcissism.
okay. Yeah, it's like, well, if you have something and I want it, then something's not fair. Or if I have something, I don't want you to have it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And this is the other awful thing that happens is they are attracted to people who look good, make them look good. So they may find your success something that they gravitate towards you for it because they want to say that they're associated with you. But once they're in a relationship with you, it no longer is a benefit. It's a place of tension and competition.
Yeah.
Now they resent you for your success.
Yeah, I remember speaking with a woman who said, I know there's no such thing as a perfect person, but my father was perfect. And, but I know he wasn't, but he really kind of was. And as she was saying that, I just, and she wound up just being a grossly, just haughty.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, if I can find someone in my world who meets that idealized standards, and then I latch onto it, that means I have it too. And
Yeah.
so they can have sort of that backwards way of putting you down. It's like, of course, you don't know people like that, and you don't know people like me, but I do. And there's that ongoing condescension that they carry.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, so you got to watch out for that because it's like it's a from that I think that was one of the things because I'm such a cooperative person by nature, it really blindsided me that there are people who would see what I do or who I am as a threat and that I need to be aware and conscious of that and sort of assess someone's motives. Be a little more astute about that.
You know, one of the things that research has actually shown is that part of the healthy personality includes multiple characteristics, but right at the top of the list is the characteristic of conscientiousness, making sure that I conduct myself in light of who you are. And there's a courtesy, there's an element of empathy, there's a willingness to blend and harmonize. And you mentioned at the top that you kind of got caught up thinking, well, that's the way I think, therefore I'm sure they would appreciate it, and turned out it didn't work out that well.
Right.
But narcissists don't have that conscientious nature. as a they don't really factor in who you are and why you feel what you do. It's like you're either on my team or you're not on my team.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, they say that they hope you're on their team, but they actually their team is the team of one. There is no one on their team.
Well, the subordinates and flying monkeys and
That's right.
enablers and all of
Yeah,
that. That's who
they
they
may be
see.
Batman with a sidekick, but there's nobody they're not sharing that floor with you.
Okay, touche. You made a good point on that one. Well, and then another thing you mentioned here that that toxic person doesn't make self-initiated efforts to repair damaged relationships. And in other words, I'm not responsible for any problems I've got, which by default means you are. They just don't feel the need to say, "Hey, I can tell that didn't go over well. Help educate me, help me understand."
Yeah, that goes back to the fact that they're the center of the stage, the spotlight's on them, there is no one else on the stage, so therefore everything they do is okay. So if you have a reaction to that, then their reaction, it has to be your problem, can't be their problem
No,
because they're
no.
good the way that they are. Again, they have no empathy in the fact that the way they're impacting you. And then when you go back to the unconscious core of shame, to have to get soft like that and to admit maybe they made an error would have that kicks them into them having to own that maybe they're more vulnerable that they want to be, and that defensive structure doesn't allow them to go there. So they're really quick to defend that, and you can't even approach that with them. You can't even, it's not even a vernacular, it's not part of the way that they see the world. They're so well defended. That's back to why they don't change. They're so well defended, but you can't approach this issue to have it make sense, to have them have more empathy into what's going on, which is really, again, heartbreaking.
Well, you want to know? I'll tell you a funny little story. I think I was maybe in the first grade, and we had a teacher who we were in some sort of art thing, and she asked, "Would you draw a picture of your favorite thing?" So I thought, well, that's easy. So I drew this big thing that was brown and kind of like that shape and all. And she came over and said, is that a mountain that you're drawing?" And I just felt so defeated. I said, "No, it's chocolate cake." And I just felt terrible because it's like I tried to draw a chocolate cake. I'm not the second coming of Rembrandt, but can't you tell it's a chocolate cake? The good thing is she took me and she could just tell that I felt deflated. And she said, now that you mention it, it could. And she said, "Why don't we put a couple of candles on there and it'll maybe make it look like it's a birthday cake," which is perfect. He's like, "Yeah, who knows? I may have just had a birthday." And she was very gentle and she was very kind and kind of redirected me and said, "It's okay. If you and I have a misunderstanding, then we can figure it out." And I felt so relieved.
Yeah,
And that's a simple little illustration, but
yeah,
empathy and redirecting in a healthy kind of way is something that can be trained in a kid. And the implication is narcissists either they didn't have that experience, or if they did, it didn't settle well with them.
yeah,
They hear judgment and they
yes,
hear grades, and so they've decided, well, before you can do that to me, I'm going to do it to you.
right, right.
So
Right. Yeah. And the way that, this is, they found this over and over in research. It's come up so many times that when we make an error, people find us the softest and connect with us the best. How sad to have a group of people think that being imperfect is off-putting when actually it's our imperfections that we connect the most powerfully around.
yeah. Yeah, another thing that I mentioned is that intimacy, is
Mhm.
built upon knowing the worst about each other and loving each other through it.
Yes.
And saying, "I know that you've heard on this, tell me about it." And then I'll share with you some of my experiences, and there can be that vulnerability. What is it about narcissists that scares that vulnerability and openness scares them so much?
Yeah, they fear rejection and abandonment. I think that they thought that they were really truly known, nobody would love them. Now, where did that come from? I don't know. But somehow, I think that that's back to that core issue at ages roughly 9 months to 2 years old, the autonomy versus shame, that somehow if I spill my milk or drop something or make a mess that I'm going to be found out and nobody's going to love me. Now, did that actually happen? Maybe. Or maybe this is just a person just doesn't have the ability to absorb that their environment is accepting. I don't know, but somehow that
The
fear of
message
being
didn't
seen,
get
yeah,
through, did it?
it doesn't click, it doesn't work. So they then hide. They really, really hide who they are. And yeah, that's where we connect. Like you said, that's where intimacy is really found. It's me seeing your brokenness, resonating with my brokenness and around that and feeling a tenderness towards that, and then finding we can share that safe space together. They don't go there. They really don't go there. I felt like in my relationship with the narcissistic person that I had known in that second marriage, that it was like we were playing the hokey pokey. I'd put my right arm in and he'd put his left leg in maybe, but
Yeah,
he never put his whole self in. And I could
yeah,
feel that was missing in our relationship.
yeah. Just enough to keep the game going, and that's it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so before we wrap up, I want to kind of focus on the cleaner alternative. We're talking about people who have toxicity, and one of the things that I so emphasize is we can't allow that person to set our pace. So if you've had exposure to that toxic individual, but you're wanting to move towards a more safe manner of life, what kind of priorities or adjustments would be necessary for an individual to get to that place?
Well, it depends who the toxic person is. I mean, if it's a partner, that's really tough because anytime you engage in conflict or anything that's controversial, they're antagonistic by nature. So it's going to be challenging. They're not going to want to look for resolution and closure. So I would really then guard people to become more self-protective and careful in those relationships, maybe and consider the wisdom of being in the relationship. If it's a family member or a coworker or a neighbor or something, then we have to figure out ways to get along hospitably without really risking a lot of ourselves or our hearts with these individuals. But it's tricky. It's really tricky.
Yeah, and I consider it to be so necessary for each of us, especially when we have these people in our life, to have a well-conceived definition about
Yeah.
who I'm going to be.
Yeah.
And then if that other person is in a bad mood, like you say, they're argumentative and all like that, I'm thinking, wait a minute, argumentative is not on my list of preferred ingredients. I don't feel the need to match pitch with you.
Hmm.
And it's easier said than done, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
because they're so good at hooking you. I mean, they
yeah,
know they're antagonistic by nature, and they know how to create drama antagonism with you to start arguments with you. So you have to really watch out for that you have a good sense of that and a separation from it, that you know how to withdraw. I often urge people to plan out interactions, like figure out what you want to say, practice it so that you're
yeah.
ready, so that when it happens, you can then say that.
I refer to that just rehearsing in advance.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a family gathering and you have that uncle over there who's always criticizing and sometimes tries to goad you, it's like, okay, when I'm around Uncle Joe over there, what am I going to do? Who am I going to be? And exactly, because you can't predict everything, but you know some of the trends and patterns that might be there, and you can kind of think, okay, when that shows up, who am I going to be?
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, what we're saying basically is there are some individuals who just simply don't get it. And then not only that, they feel no need to go get it. But instead, it's like, no, I'm pretty much the standard bearer here. So if there's a problem here, it must be you. And people like yourself and like me, our task is to say, well, wait a minute, let's get ourselves educated on this. There's something dreadfully inappropriate going on here. Knowledge is power, and as we're able to become knowledgeable about this, then we're able to move forward in a healing way.
Exactly. Gives us more choices. I mean, if you understand the dynamics, then you have more options yourself of what you're going to do the next time. I absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're talking today with Dr. Kerry McAvoy, the author of the book "Love You More." Great topic, great title, by the way. And you're just right down the highway from me. You're in Austin,
I
Texas.
know. I know.
I'm right up I-35 from you in Waco. Now, you're originally from Grand Rapids, though,
I
right?
am. I
Michigan.
am
So
thinking. Yeah. Yeah.
a Michigander all the way down here in Texas, then. So
Yeah.
okay, well, there's the
Yeah.
old bumper sticker. I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could.
I love living here. It's been really wonderful. And Austin is beautiful. I had this picture of rolling tumbleweeds, and then I got here and found it's lush and green with
Yeah.
hills. It's just beautiful.
Well, this is part of the, what we call the hill country here. So yeah, glad
Yeah.
you're here.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
okay.
Thank you. I have to tell you, the title, "To Love You More," where that came from, is that
Yeah.
I would say love you, and he goes, "No, I love you more." He would actually get into a competition around who loved
Even
whom more.
then,
Yeah, that's right.
as opposed to saying, why, thank you. It's like, well,
That's
let me
right.
explain to you why I'm better.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Oh my, oh, it just makes you shake your head. It's like,
I
is there
know.
nothing they just can't
No,
ruin?
no.
But
Nope,
so,
even loving somebody's a competition.
like, never mind.
That's right. Forget it. Sorry I said that.
Oh, I tell you. Well, Dr. McAvoy, thank you so much for being my guest here. And I know that people are going to get real good benefit from having listened to you. And I encourage you to look her up on her webpage. We're going to have the information below here so that you can access Dr. McAvoy. You're a real treasure. And I hope this is not the last time we have the chance to meet and discuss things together. So thanks once again for being with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carr. This is a delight. I love it. And I'm so glad to meet you as well.
Thank you. And Team Healthy, keep learning. And I will see you guys next time. I hope you have a good rest of the week.